are 2 months left in 2022. The year is just flying on by. Crazy to think. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, back to the Mike the New Haven podcast. This is episode 228, and it's going to be an interesting one. I'll introduce my guest in a moment. If you haven't checked out episode 227, that was a great one. Volume 31 of Tales from the Boom Room, profiles of the NYPD's bomb squad. With retired NYPD bomb squad detective Joe Dolan. Not only was he a bomb tech with the NYPD, he was also a bomb tech down in Carolina with the Wilmington Police Department. And before that, of course, in the NYPD, did 10 years in the emergency service unit. So interesting career for him. That episode went out to the memories of Sergeant Rod Gillis from Emergency Service Squad 8 and Detective Claude, Danny Richards of the bomb squad. Both men responded to the World Trade Center 9/11. Both men lost their lives heroically as they work to save others. So we go from that now, from the NYPD side of things with the bomb squad, to the Bureau, 26 Federal Plaza, to be more specific, with my next guest, who in his 26 years with the Bureau, fought crime at the federal level as a hard-charging FBI special agent. He was originally a Marine, and he was, for a time after his time in the Marines, as an active a member of the Corps as well as a reservist, an assistant district attorney in Queens. And before his career was over in the mid-90s with the the district attorney's office in Queens, he ventured on, like I said, into the FBI, where he truly saw the other side of the scales of justice, from the prosecutorial side, from doing the work on the street to get these bad guys in custody in the first place. And it was an interesting paradox for him, because think about it. 14 of his years were in the New York field office, the flagship office of the FBI. And then another stint now, you could almost make a Netflix comedy out of this, in North Dakota, which he'll tell me about tonight. And that for this episode 228 of the Mike the New Haven podcast, retired FBI Special Agent Frank Gasper. Frank, welcome. How are you?
Great, Mike. Hey, Mike, thanks for having me on.
No problem. Thank you for being here. So a child of New York, but where specifically did you grow up, Frank?
I grew up in Flushing, Queens, home in the Mets, but I grew up a Yankee fan, thank God. Grew up over by, everybody knows, by Holy Cross High School, a couple blocks out of there, from there, and I was one of 8 children.
Did you always want to be in law enforcement?
It's funny. I think I always wanted to do something. I talked about thinking about it, back on it. I think those late 60s and early 70s television shows and movies, and then kind of eventually working with the Franciscans. I graduated from St. Francis Prep, and then went to Manhattan, Franciscan Brothers, Christian Brothers, seeing people volunteer, helping kids out. I was a track runner, a CYO track runner, and had a coach who was an attorney and coached kids, and I ended up helping with coaching the kids when I was in high school. And I just thought it was something you do. You add something to the community and to society, do something good. I think that's why I did it.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because so many guys come from that background where their communities are just filled with firemen, with cops, with that civil service background, to where by seeing it, right, it's one thing to hear about it, but by seeing it, it motivates you to go into that field. Or if not that being the case, and obviously, as you said, watching it on television, right? If you grew up watching shows like Emergency or movies like Prince in the City, or obviously even for the more recent generations, those old episodes of Cops, right? There's that part of you that says, wow, I want to do that. And a lot of these people end up doing just that. And you're one of those people.
Yeah, no, I grew up, my neighborhood was full of cops and firefighters. At that time, you could actually, cops and firefighters could afford to live in Flushing, Queens. Now they can't buy a house there. It's too damn expensive.
Exactly.
But, and then, it's funny, the television show, I think the television show did more influence me than else. Believe it or not, it was a comedy named Barney Miller.
Yeah, I've heard a lot. I've heard a lot about Barney Miller. A lot of guys will reference that, because the common theme I get is it was such a realistic portrayal of a detective squad specifically.
Absolutely true. That is what my experience of police work is, or law enforcement. It's Barney Miller. It's the characters who come into the station house or the field office, the complainants and stuff. That is so true. And the people, the detectives working there, I think some of the people like NYPD Blues and those type of shows, and they show, cops beating people up. That's not the way. That's not my experience. What I saw people more, they cared about what they did, but not, it was more that the Barney Miller type.
Yeah. And it's funny, there's that classic scene in Barney Miller where they arrest a guy in the wintertime for indecent exposure. And the Miller asked one of the guys that brings him in, what's he in for? And the guy says, indecent exposure. And Barney's like, in this weather? So, again, but then again, that's a perfect portrayal of the detective squad. So before any of that, and we're talking with retired FBI Special Agent Frank Gasper, there was the Marine Corps. You talked about, earlier on wanting to do something. And I guess at that time in your life, you felt that that was the best way to do something.
Absolutely. When I was in college, I knew I wanted to join one of the military services. I didn't know which one. And it dates back to, believe it or not, when I was in the 60s coming on Friday afternoon, there used to be a Channel 9 used to show war movies Friday afternoon. And one time I came home and my parents were doing some work in the front of the house, and I actually dug a foxhole next to the house, which didn't go over too well with my parents. But ever since then, I think I wanted to be in the military. And I got to college. I said I want to do this, and looked around the services, and I said I want to join the best. And I ended up going to OCS after 2 weeks after graduating from Manhattan College. Went down to OCS and was commissioned 10 weeks later.
During that time in camp, I mean, make no mistake about it, they're trying to break you. And when I say you, I mean generally. They're trying to see who's tough enough to survive in this element and who's not. And it's not easy on the body. It's definitely not easy on the mind. And one can make the argument, as I'm sure you can, you lived it, that the mental battles are tougher than the physical ones. So during that period of training and being in camp, what was it? What channel were you able to reach in your mind to have the fortitude to get on through?
I'd like the challenge. What's different about OCS and boot camp is that what they do is put you in positions where you have to lead your peers, and which is a tremendous, I would say, goal. Goal is not the right word, but just a tremendous idea. You lead your peers in OCS. Every 3 days they switch billets. Sometimes you're platoon sergeant or you're the company commander, and you're responsible that the staff to say, hey, you get that platoon out there, you get that company out there, and then they don't give you enough time, and you have to get your peers out to perform some task or meet a mission, and tremendous deal. And the other thing they do teach you, I was a runner in high school. I ran a little bit in college, but I played more. I played baseball in college, but I used to officiate track. But I was a runner, so I was always in pretty good shape, and which actually helped me at OCS. So the physical part of it wasn't a big deal with me, where other people it was, but for me it was not. So it was more the mental issue and getting people to take that pressure of getting your peers to perform a mission. And that's what I think OCS, at least the Marine Corps, at that time, the Marine Corps' system was great. I think they've kept with it. I'm not exactly sure, but I thought they did a great job.
Well, I imagine during your years in the Bureau and even your years in the District Attorney's Office in Queens, that training had to have served as an immense help to motivate those around you, especially with those really tough cases where sometimes you get into that mental fog and it is hard to push through.
Yeah, you know what it is? I think the biggest thing is being see things through. I mean, one of the greatest compliments I ever was paid was actually a defense attorney trying to demean me, and he called me a zealot. And I said, a zealot, yeah, because I'm a zealot, because I will work something. I will latch onto something and not let it go. I'll dig. If it's something to find, if there's something to find, I will find it. So I took that as, and I think that all dates back to my Marine training. Hey, accomplish the missions. There's a message to Garcia. And when you go to TBS, which is the basic school after OCS, and have you read, at least when I was there, and I think they still do, Message to Garcia, and it's a story about a guy in a guerrilla war and all these tribulations he has to do to get to accomplish the mission. No excuses. Don't just get the mission done, and that's what the Marine Corps taught you: accomplish the mission.
Absolutely. So during those initial years on active duty, 83 to 87, and this is just my interpretation of it as a history buff and reading about it. But again, I didn't live it, so I want to get it from you. it seemed like that was a time when the nation was collectively waiting for the other shoe to drop. There was the Beirut bombing in 1983 that killed hundreds of Marines, a very awful and shocking terrorist attack, and a tragedy at that. And then there was the Cold War. Now, the Cold War was reaching its end stages. It would end in the early 90s, but it's still going on. And that's why I say it kind of felt like it was a nation on edge for a variety of reasons, but those chief among them. What was it like being in the Corps? What was the morale like, I should say, in the Corps during that time?
I think in the 80s, in the 80s, the country was just coming out of the 70s and the Vietnam War.
Mm-hmm.
And that was an awful time to be in the military and to have anything to do with the military. And the country itself had that. In the 80s, things had changed. The military, there was a buildup in the military. The other thing to do, there was some incidents in the late 70s involving people, drugs. I think it was 80 or 81. It was a terrible accident on an aircraft carrier, and when they did the testing of the bodies, it turned out most of the sailors had THC in their system and maybe some other drugs. So we started piss testing people, and so we got rid of the people who were druggies. And I caught the tail end of that. And the other thing is people started to want to join the military again. And I remember going to graduating OCS, 2-star general up there, graduating class. And I'm not a guy, I don't come from a military background. I come from two teachers. My mother eventually became a teacher, but she was a housewife at the time. And my father was a college professor, and a very extremely liberal college professor. And here I am, and a general is giving a speech, and he talked about how there's people, you're going to find majors and staff sergeants, some gunnies, who shouldn't be in the Marine Corps. But because they didn't have anybody else, they're in the Marine Corps. We had to keep them around. And he said, you're part of that new Marine Corps that's going to get us back to where we should be. It was interesting, because obviously I'm a new second lieutenant. I'm major. That's way up there. That's field grade officer. But at least that's the Marines, and people are honest. And that general, I don't remember his name, but he was honest. Hey, there's a problem, in that middle management, both enlisted and in officers, and we're just going to work through it. And that's what we did in the Marine Corps. When I joined in 83 to 85, through 87 when I went active duty, the Marine Corps was constantly improving. By the time we went to Gulf War, the Marine Corps was a really good, functionally military unit. I was back in Baghdad in 2005, and the Marine Corps was much better than when I was active duty. I was just amazed how good the Marines were, how good the professionalism of the Corps had been. So it was an interesting time. That's funny how you point that out, because that is so true. We were in a transition at that time. So that's a very good, I think, a very good observation for somebody who, obviously yourself, who didn't live it. It's interesting that you did observe that.
Oh, well, thank you. I try my best to do my homework. We're talking with retired FBI Special Agent Frank Gasper. You're talking to a teacher's pet. That's why. You could chalk it up to that. I've always been a teacher's pet. If you know me well, you know that. Hello to our friends in the chat: Jay Driscoll, Joe Maliga, Billy Kennedy, retired E-man, sergeant out of Truck 1, 4, and 7, respectively, in the Emergency Service Unit. And Joe, of course, like I mentioned, retired correctional officer. And Pete Pranzo, author of Harlem Raiders, a great book which you should get, amongst other works of his, and a retired lieutenant out of the NYPD's Street Crime Unit, amongst other commands. So good to see you all. If you have a question for Frank, submit it, and I'll try to get to it at the proper time. And yes, Joe, I know what you're going to ask. Joe and I have a running joke. Perhaps you and I. Perhaps you'll see that later, Frank. So, getting back to the active duty years, before I get to the Gulf War, take me through a standard day. This is a two-part question of active duty, what it was like, and also where were you stationed outside of the country of the United States?
Yeah, after going through OCS, TBS, I went to IOC. I was an infantry officer. I think they chose me to be an infantry officer. I was a runner, so I was in pretty good shape. I went down to Camp Lejeune, joined 2nd Battalion, 4th Marines, was a platoon commander, 2nd Battalion, 4th Marines. As platoon commander, basically You go in, you lead a platoon anywhere from 30 to 40 Marines, depending if it's a weapons platoon or rifle platoon. You meet your Marines, you go out there, you go out in the field, you do field training, usually at a company level, then as a battalion, as you're getting ready to deploy. I deployed to Okinawa in 1985. Prior to going to Okinawa, you do a workup. We went out to what they call a CAX, which is at 29 Palms, California, where you do all kinds of training, live fire training. You end up fighting as a company, and then eventually as a battalion. You start as a platoon, company, battalion. You had a big field exercise out there in the desert. You're usually out there a month. Then we went on Okinawa, spent 6 months deployed to Okinawa, spent some time, spent about 3 months at Camp Fuji out of that 6 months, which is on mainland Japan. Came back from our 6-month deployment, took a leave period a couple of weeks, and boy, we're getting ready to go to the Norway. So we did, you work up, you go the mountain warfare course out in California. Greatest place, greatest school I've ever been to. Military, FBI, civilian, tremendous training out there by Bridgeport, California. Did the winter package, and that's when you learn who your Marines are. That's when a lot of guys are yellers, and the big guys are yellers. When you start going up that mountain, you start 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock in the morning, go up the mountain. By the time you get to the top of the mountain, you find out who you guys are, and you end up doing ski training. We do ski training, warfare training for a month, and by the time we left there, I would say a third of the Marines couldn't hack it. And mostly the enlisted, the couple officers couldn't hack it either. So we went from that to another training out at Fort McCoy, Wisconsin, and then we went over to Norway. And we were supposed to do a big NATO exercise in Norway. When I was there was a terrible, terrible accident involving the Norwegian engineering platoon, and 15 or 17 of them ended up perishing in an avalanche, and the whole country shut down. The Norwegians, they had to end up canceling the operation. We stayed out there, but the Norwegians wouldn't participate in the operation, but they had to find their dead, bury their dead. It was awful. Got back from Camp Lejeune at the time that my commitment was about up, and then I wanted to figure out something to do. And I said, I think I want to go to law school. I might want to join the NYPD. My choice was either go back and become a cop or go to law school. And I said, no, I think I want to go to law school. So I put in to go to Okinawa for a year at that time. So I left. I did 3rd Marine Division. I left in July of '86. Spent a year in Okinawa. While I was there, I studied for the LSAT. I ended up taking the LSAT in Okinawa. Wrote to these law schools, looking for applications. At that time, there was no internet, so everything was by mail. One of the schools, I never got the application, so I got the other ones. I kind of made my own application up and sent it in. I was admitted to a number of schools, and I was on a waiting list some others. One of the schools on a waiting list was Villanova. And then I got back from Okinawa. I spent 6 weeks out in the West Coast, getting ready to go to school. I thought I was going to go to school at a law school out in San Diego. I called up Villanova. I was on weightlifting in Villanova. Villanova waitlisted at Notre Dame. I had turned down Seton Hall and a couple other schools. I wanted to do something else. I actually had half a scholarship for the school out in California. And then I got back to the East Coast. My father at the time had some illness, so I wanted to try to stick around there a little closer than me in California. And the Friday before classes started, I called up both Villanova and Notre Dame. I called them during the week. It's there's no chance you're not going to get in. You're not going to get in. I called that Thursday. Well, call us on Friday. So I called them on Friday, and Villanova says, you come here Monday morning with a check and you're in. So I said, hey, got him. I was my parents' house in Queens. I had been there for about a week, packed up my car, drove down to Villanova, didn't know where I was going to stay. And Got the law school. I was the only guy in a jacket and a tie. Showed up. It was 8 o'clock in the morning, and the way going over work, there was a class of 8, class of 9, section of 8, section of 9, two sections. It was about 8:30. I gave a check over, and there was a woman there next to me, and they go, "Which schedule would you want?" I go, "You know what? I'll go to 9 o'clock section because the 8 o'clock had already started class. They didn't want to miss a class, so they gave me a schedule. They literally took a Sharpie and blacked out the person's name who didn't show up, who they thought was coming. They gave me the schedule. Boom. That's how I got into law school."
Interesting story and an interesting evolution for you, because what I wanted to ask you was this. Getting back, and now granted, the Gulf War lasted about 5 months. There was initially Operation Desert Shield and then Desert Storm, which rounded the war out August of 1990 to January of 1991. So it wasn't as long as other wars, but nevertheless, you're in the thick of a very, very, very dangerous and deadly mission. There were minimal losses on the U.S. side, many more on the opposition side, but still losses nonetheless, too, to contend with. The acclimation process is not easy after that. Trying to find your footing, not in a military setting, but just as in a regular civilian setting. Of course, this was well before your time in the Bureau, which we'll get to a little later. How difficult, if at all, was assimilation back to society?
I'll say this. I left. I was part of Fox Company 225. We were activated, joined an active duty battalion, who then went over, which was part of 2nd LAI battalion, which is part of 2nd Marine Division. We went over as a division over the Kuwait. We did what we did. I became the only reservist in an active duty company. They didn't realize I had been active. When I was on active duty, I questioned reservists, but reservists hadn't been activated since the Korean War. So they didn't activate reservists during Vietnam. So people didn't know an activity what they were. So when I got back, it was a lot different. I got back and gone from being on active duty, boom, we got back to New York, May 30th, boom, you're gone. You're done. Go back. It wasn't like there was no checking out, going through any kind of process. You're back to civilians. I had, I had called in a bunch of airstrikes and things like that when I was in the Gulf War. And so it was a little different. And at the time I was looking for a job. I had graduated law school. I had passed the New York bar. And then I had to go find a job, and that's why I was, in the meantime, getting back, trying to relax a little bit, at the same time trying to find a job. And lucky or not, Judge Brown became the district attorney in the county of Queens. I got an interview a couple of weeks after I got back. I passed the first interview. I went to see the chief assistant, and the first thing he said to me, "Don't relax, don't worry about it. You have the job." Which was nice. And I got to say that I thought the Queens DA's office, as it turned out with Judge Brown, it was a tremendous office. I thought Judge Brown did a great job. I thought I met some really super attorneys there. And but as far as the acclimation, it was different. But it was different, and the society was changing a little bit. We had a parade. It was when I was in law school, people didn't like. Honestly, I remember going to interviews. Oh, you're a Marine. They didn't want to interview you. The Bronx DA's office at a time where they had on the bottom of their thing, "We do not discriminate due to veterans, due to military service," because they were actually telling people who were draft dodgers that we won't use that against you. And we really don't want people who were military at the time. It just shows you how times have changed. I think that started with after the Gulf War, and it's changed and for the good. I think of the country. There was no reason the guys who came back from Vietnam, the stuff they suffered was, I was a young kid at the time, and it just rubbed me the wrong way the way people in this country treated them. And it's, you can say the government, no, it was. There were people in the country that treated those veterans very, very badly. And they had nothing to do with politics. They were just, some of them were drafted, some of them were, enjoyed because they wanted to do service to the country. And and a lot of people in this country turned their backs on them.
Talking with retired FBI Special Agent Frank Gasper. here in the Mike and Haven podcast for episode 228. Happy to have him. The thing about New York City is there's 5 cities really mixed into one. It makes up a beautiful conglomerate of 8 million different stories, as I've often said on this show. And Queens is a city unto itself. It's almost a nation unto itself. During that time in the early 90s, this was during the Safe Street, Safer City era, later the Broken Windows era, right at the time that you left to go to the Bureau. Tell me about the standard cases that were most pressing back then. Was it drug cases? Was it organized crime? Was it gun cases? Was it all mixed together?
I would say the 2 cases that people really emphasize were drug cases, because obviously it was a big epidemic of drugs. So I ended up working narcotics trials for a while, which I didn't like doing, but it was buy and bust going on and observation sales and stuff going on. But try to get a control the streets, get people dealing off, get users to figure out something, because that was causing the crime. The robberies, the big robberies and burglaries that were going on. There was car theft was an issue at that time too, but it was it was driving the drugs were really driving the crime in the DA's office. It appeared to be driving the criminal the crime that was going on in the city, which was overrun. I forget what year it was, 91 or 90, some crazy amount of 2,000 homicides.
90.
Yeah, and you can't hide. The thing about homicides, you can't hide them. The administration stuff. Sometimes you can downgrade. Robberies to thefts or burglaries to criminal trespass and things like that. So you can manipulate numbers. Can't manipulate bodies. Bodies are bodies. And that really showed where we were as a society. And it started on the Dinkins realized there was a problem, and we started hiring a bunch of cops, which we needed to do. We get some funding, both the police department and the DA's office, hiring people. It was, the courts were flooded with people. There was so many criminal court judges who were appointed to the Supreme Court just to be able to handle the caseloads. Forget the ADAs, just they don't have enough courts to handle what was going on. And it was, the city, it started, I'll say, Ray Kelly and Dinkins started it, but it really, when we got when Giuliani and Bratton came in, the city changed, and my opinion, saved the city.
And it's funny because people look at the numbers around the time that 1994 had concluded, and they were touting a big drop in homicides from 2,000 to 1,000 now. One, with the current context where the numbers, even though they're spiking, they're still at about 400, 500. You like to get them back down. Obviously, it's not good to see them going up. Might look at that and say, well, why would you tout a drop like that when it's still over 1,000? But that's just it. Look at where you were. You had to start somewhere. And they were making progress to where by the end of the 90s, the number was 600. And at one point, as I often bring up on the show, just a few short years ago, at the end of 2018, it was 289. So you see that grunt work done by the men and the women on the street. And of course, obviously, somebody like Bill Bratton, who you mentioned, and the men and the women in the DA's offices too, during that era. Now, I want to ask you, because I am a child of Jack McCoy. I grew up watching him on Law and Order, and I loved him. Even though Law and Order can get a little wonky with how it presents things, I always felt he was a good view of what a assistant district attorney in New York is. And I loved, a character like Abby Carmichael, who was just polar opposite, but still a very realistic portrayal in my mind. So I'm sure, and let's say it's a heavy duty case, an assault case or a homicide case, and you're trying to convince me that that man or that woman is the one responsible. How are you working me? How are you appealing to me with the evidence? What are you saying? What are you even gesturing to get me to believe you?
It's funny because I worked with some great ADAs. You talked about Mr. McCoy, the character. I worked with a guy named Bob Masters, who reminded me, physically resembles him, and reminded me of him a lot. Bob taught me a lot. Bob handled a couple police homicides involving police officers while he was with the DA's office, and the big thing is, hey, what do you have? What add up? How do we put that, the guy we think did it, the guy or gal we think we did? What do we have? What physical evidence do we have? What circumstantial evidence do we have? That type of stuff. What do we have? What do we have to convince the jury? But the big thing is, bottom line, you got to convince a jury. And juries, we like to think about it. Hey, we're law enforcement, and we have a lot of times we come from a certain mindset. Well, we have juries of 12 different people from 12 different backgrounds of people, and you got to get people from other backgrounds who are suspicious of the police officers. And you got to that's why evidence is so important. There's a time where police officers wouldn't allow to wear their uniforms when they were testifying. They'd have to wear civilian jacket and tie and so forth like that. It was all we thought we could influence the jury. Well, the jury would be the other way. Sometimes it would be, they'd take it the other way. They'd you're a police officer. We're not gonna take your word on it. And then perfect example is, and depending on the charges, you have a gun case and drug cases, in very similar cases in a lot of ways, but almost always gun possession case and drug possession or drug sale cases, it's always police. The only witnesses are police officers, and you have a testing of the gun, or you have testing of the drugs. But they're much easier to get a conviction in a drug case than a gun possession case. And you think of New York City, and the press gives you an idea that it's really the guns, and people don't want to. Why are we going after drugs? Well, the people who live in that neighborhood, or a lot of times in the projects, a lot of the drug cases took place around housing projects. Is that people in the project, they don't want the drug dealers there. They know what's going on. So they will much readily convict somebody of a drug case than they would a gun case. But they think the guy carrying the gun, who's caught with the gun, he's carrying a gun to keep himself safe. So they much readily will, same type of witnesses, much easier to get a drug conviction at that time than it was a gun conviction.
Tell me, right before, I'm going to get to the Bureau next, but, right before you got to the Bureau, of course, was the O.J. Simpson craze. And I remember Bill Ritter, who was the longtime Channel 7 anchor here in New York, mentioning this to me a number of years back when he was on the show, that working in L.A. during that time, there was no way that they were going to convict O.J. Simpson after the incidents a few years earlier with, of course, the beating of, I forget his name,
Rodney King,
and thank you, in 1991 at the hands of the LAPD, or certain officers with the LAPD. And so it changed the way people looked at police nationwide. And it's funny, to go back to Jack McCoy, there was an episode in 2002 of Law and Order right after 9/11 where in his closing argument, he makes the point, your opinion of police may have been different up until recently when you saw them running into collapsing buildings to save lives. So during that time, even though it wasn't a New York case, it swept with the nation, like I said, what was it like working police-involved cases with what I will call post-OJ juries?
I think that drug case is a perfect example. People would not, depending on your jury and would select and where they come, much harder to get convictions based on just police testimony, especially in gun cases, than it was in other cases where a robbery case where you have a victim who can testify or so forth. Different cases where you have a victim outside the police office. When you have a victim, people tend to focus on that victim. So even if you have obviously police officers, police duty investigation, they find evidence, so forth, because you have a victim. People in those assault cases or in robbery cases, they much easier to get a conviction than just say a case that just involved police officers. They may again, that might be true today, but I think back then in the 90s in New York, that was a perception of it. And I will say the one thing is, when I saw the O.J. Simpson case, I did not think I saw much better prosecutors in the Queens DA's office than I did who were on that television. They did not do a very good job. I'm not saying the jury was great or whatever, but I did not think the prosecution did a very good job in that case.
Interesting question here from Core Coaching and Consulting. Thank you, ma'am, for tuning in tonight. I appreciate it. Did you work on mob-related cases? She wants to know.
Yeah, I did. When I was in the FBI, I worked I worked C10, which is organized crime. It was a banana squad. It was the first squad I was assigned to in New York after going through my training. They have a little training once you get to New York. They rotate you around. But I was on C10 banana squad. And I was assigned to a guy named Vincent Acero. Vincent Acero was a made member of the Banana. He was active cap in the Banana family. Signed his case. It's funny, I got assigned to Vinny. It's kind of a funny story. I was a DA's office. I worked a lot of arraignments, and arraignments you go criminal history. So I really learned how to read a rap sheet. I got assigned Vinny's case. The first thing you do, hey, you run a rap sheet on the guy. So I run a rap sheet on the guy, and I run a DMV on the guy to get some background on the guy. So I come back and I'm reading the rap sheet, and I noticed he's got a different date of birth on his rap sheet than he does in his DMV. And I noticed he has a DWI in his rap sheet. So I take the date of birth on his rap sheet, I run it through DMV, and lo and behold, I find a second driver's license Vinny's gotten. And what he did is he got the DWI, and he wanted his license, and he wanted to save on his insurance. So he changed his date. He kept his name, changed his date of birth, and he changed his address with his license. He used his son's fence business in Ozone Park, and he got a second license. At the time, there was a assistant named Jerry Brave, who was running the Brackets Bureau, who had a case against Vinny Acero, enterprise corruption cases, similar to a RICO case, but on the state side, which had been dismissed by the court for a legal technicality. So I called Jerry up and said, "Hey, Jerry, I know you got Vinny," and I said, "You want to take a look at this? Run his rap sheet." And I told him what had happened. So he thanked me, he called me, and he had one of his squad detectives, a retired Ronnie, and I can't remember Ronnie's last name. He was a retired detective who was on the Queens DA squad. Ronnie went out, pulled Vinny over. Vinny presented the fraudulent license, and boom, they locked him up for the fraud, because it's a fraud and a fraudulent license, and he ended up doing the trial, and he was convicted. In the meantime, he got his Vinny got his enterprise corruption case was reinstated. I helped Jerry in that case. They ended up convicting Vinny as on the enterprise corruption case, which resulted in Vinny going to jail on the state side, which he had never. Here's a guy, an organized crime guy, main member. So long he had spent time in jail before that was 30 days.
30 days.
Yeah. And an older guy. Then he was in his mid-60s at the time. He had an impulse problem where he was known to be violent. But he had, hadn't been spending any time in jail.
Right. He'd only done a few counts. Looking him up right now. Can't find him quite yet on Wikipedia, but looking up him up here, he's probably, I imagine he's not with us anymore, Vinny Acero.
No, Vinny Acero might be. He's the only guy ever to stand trial for the Lufthansa heist.
Oh, he is. He's still alive. He's in his 80s now.
Yeah, he was found not guilty in that case, but it was a federal case. I actually testified in that case. One of hundreds of people who testified.
Right.
And I had a very small part in that case, but he was found not guilty of the case, and then he got convicted later on in another federal. About a year later, or a couple of years later, he ended up getting into a dispute with somebody and beating somebody up.
Yep, and it actually says he was convicted of arson.
Yeah,
so he's in jail right now on arson charges, and that's probably going to be a death sentence for him, given his age, although you never know. So just to backtrack to get into the Bureau in 1995, now you'd seen law enforcement at the DA's level. You'd seen what the NYPD did, but you didn't go to the NYPD. You went instead a step up, like I said, over at 26 Federal Plaza with the FBI. What was it that made you choose the Bureau over locally the NYPD?
I think because the Bureau, Bureau is rather small, and it's interesting. I thought it was more interesting work. I was working in the DA's office, and I was working, buying bus, working narcotics trials. I thought I was leveling out at the DA's office. Didn't like what I wanted to do. I thought I had something else to offer. I wanted to do something that was more exciting and better for my skills. It's funny, when we were in law school, I always wanted to be an investigator. Even when we were in law school, I remember once probably blowing had shot at an internship in the Brooklyn DA's office. It was like, in the interview, I said, yeah, I'd like to, I really want to investigate it. Maybe I'm trying to invest, kind of investigate things. So anyway, the Bureau at the time had just started a massive hiring. They had to freeze for almost 5 years. So they were hiring people. And I said, you know what, let's go. And I applied. The process took about a year, and I got in the Bureau. And 25 years, I never felt like I had a job when I worked in the Bureau.
And you worked so many unique cases, most of them revolving around fraud, as I'll touch on. And that was a unique time for the FBI, just on a national scale, because it's the age of newfound terrorism. You'd had the World Trade Center bombing in 1993. You'd had the Meyer Kahane assassination in 1990. 1995, the year you got there, was the Oklahoma City bombing. And there's the manhunt for Ramzi Youssef in that time frame. He's captured. He's extradited back to the States, and his trial's underway. And really, a year after you get there, TWA Flight 800, which was not terrorism, but nevertheless a big investigation for you guys.
TWA Flight 800, I remember that night like anything. My oldest son at the time, it was the first night he came home from the hospital. He had been in a NICU. He had been born early, so he's in a NICU for 10 days, and he came home that night. So he literally just got him to sleep. We was sleeping. My wife and I we get the call came out, and I was living in Manhattan, had to go down 25th. I didn't even have a BU car, which we usually have cars in the FBI. You have to go places, but because I lived in Manhattan, they didn't give us BU cars. So we had to go down, and the people they called in all night, all the kind of new agents who didn't have cars, so they had to get up, and they had to decide to send some people out to the scene out in Long Island, which was terrible, and they sent other people to the airport to do interviews of everybody. Me being from Queens, I spent time in the DA's office. I actually had a DWI trial revolving around the Port Authority. I said, I'll go out to the airport. So I went to the airport, spent the whole night at the airport, did a number of interviews, come back. But, in the long run, the guys who went out to the scene, they were out there for 10 days before they came back. I mean, they would literally work 10 days straight. Some 20, sleeping in cars, just, it's just what a tragic incident. One of the persons who was big in that case was a new agent like myself, a classmate of mine. We were both new agents. A guy named Steve Baumgart, great agent. He had been an F-14 pilot in the Navy, his Naval Academy grad. And because he knew missile, and there was some reports from eyewitness reports. Sometimes on the good, they saw a stream, and they thought people thought maybe it was a missile going up and hit the plane, but it turned out what it was a leak when the explosion, and it was actually gas leaking down that was on fire. But at the time, so they put him. He knew missiles, even though he's a brand new agent. He spent the time in the Navy. He understand surface air missiles, so they put him in charge of that in the New York office. There was a guy, head of the office at that time, a guy named Jim Kallstrom, tremendous leader, former Marine, led that investigation, no stone unturned, took over the Grumman facility out in Grumman, out in Long Island. It was an old, in fact, where they built the F-14, took it over, rebuilt, a large percent of that plane. And they scraped it up from the bottom, and they finally figured out what the cause was after a couple of years working closely with the National Transportation Board and all kinds of different agencies. They did a great job to figure out it wasn't terrorism, but they left no stone unturned, making sure that was true.
Before I get to the fraud aspect of your investigations, there is the undercover aspect as well. And when people think of undercover operations, they tend to think of deep cover things, such as, of course, what the DEA might do, for example, or at the local level, what local police departments will do to bring down an auto theft ring, for example, or a drug ring, for example. But the FBI has had a heavy hand in it over the years, and many skilled undercover agents. Its greatest operation, of course, the Joe Pistone operation. I got the chance to have Joe on this show and ask him about it. So you guys certainly have had your many successes, as big as that widely documented as that, and some not documented, but nevertheless great operations. Were you ever undercover, or did you work, or did you supervise operations, I should say, in which you sent someone undercover?
I worked undercover, but I worked in a support role. I mean, nothing dangerous, nothing. I can't talk a lot about it because it's
That's fine.
techniques. But I literally showed up to a skyscraper every day in Manhattan. Worked with a fantastic support employee. We operated in this building. Everybody in the building, we were a business in the building. But we were the FBI, but we were somebody else, and to support wide range of undercover operations throughout the country. What we did,
So
what I did for a year and a half.
As it pertains to fraud, of course, one of the more notable cases you had was the national, and there's a lot of them, and we'll try to get to as many of them as we can. The National Speakers Bureau case. Now, for the audience that isn't familiar with that, what did that entail? What were they guilty of? What did you get them on?
There was a guy named Alan Walker who ran the Speakers Bureau, and what Alan Walker did is that he would hire celebrities, and we're talking people like Andy Rooney, Martin Luther King III, James Earl Jones, James Carville, just a number. I mean, celebrities would happen with mostly colleges and some businesses and the libraries. Among one of the victims being a library, he would be like the go-between between a celebrity and the event or the organization needing a speaker, and he would pay to take a contract to get a speaker, take his fee out, and then was supposed to pay the speaker. And what he used to do is he realized, hey, some of these people do a lot of events. A lot of times they don't complain. They don't even ask for their money. So he started keeping the money, and he ran his business that way. And he did that to Andy Rooney, and he did that to a guy, Scott Carpenter, one of the original 7 Mercury astronauts, and some other notable people. And they the way he worked his contract was he had a arbitration clause where he couldn't really sue him because he had an arbitration. He had to go to White Plains, New York, and these people from all over the country. And so he, kept his money, and eventually Andy Rooney had someone wrote a column about Andy Rooney. Other people started talking. Hey, wait a second. Victims started coming forth. Eventually, Scott Carpenter's attorney contacted the FBI. I was handed the case. I can take a look at it, see what you got. I went out, interviewed some people, realized got enough to get a criminal complaint against Alan Walker. I go to arrest Alan Walker. We follow him into his place of business. At the time, we were just going to arrest him and serve him a grand jury subpoena for his records. But we follow him into the business, and he doesn't. We go there. He won't answer the door. We're out there like 45 minutes. Like, and just come to the door. Like, come on, you got to be kidding me. Like, we know you're in there. So eventually, we broke down the door, go in there, and he's sitting behind his desk with his right hand in his desk drawer, and his left hand holding the telephone. Well, maybe the audience realize, this is a white collar arrest. You're not expecting this, but at the same time, this is the first time the guy's ever getting arrested. You don't know what that guy's got in his drawer, his desk drawer. You have no idea, and the guy's not complying. He's not showing his hands. He's literally continuing his conversation on the telephone and just like ignoring us. So eventually we come over. We straighten it. I'm there in an arrest team with 7 or 8 people, in a small office. So I looked at myself and talked to my supervisor. The hell with this grand jury subpoena. This guy's gonna do this. We're never gonna get his record. So we held the scene, got a search warrant, arrested a search warrant. Which best thing I ever did. I learned from then on. Forget subpoena. If you have enough to get a search warrant, get a search warrant, because that's what made the case. I ended up identifying 60 some odd victims through his records and contacting the victims, and we ended up going to one of these guys. He wants to go to trial. We had enough, but he went to trial, and we ended up having a trial with him, a 4-week long trial where we had people like Magic Johnson testified at the trial. I think I might have a list here somewhere. of some of the people who testified. It's just a real range of people. I remember Martin Luther King III, Cal Mosby Braun, Deborah Norville, James Carville. These people, all testified among 60 people who testified, and he was convicted of the crime. And the one thing that stands out of that trial is two things stand out of that trial, which I would never do. I think it was wrong of the people who did it. The one was the judge, James Earl Jones, at the time was a spokesman for Verizon. In the break of his testimony, the judge asked James Earl Jones to come in the back of the courtroom and where her chambers was, and he recorded her outgoing message on her answer machine. I just don't think it was right. This is a judge, a federal judge, and I thought even worse was Friday. It was a Friday afternoon. Magic Johnson was testifying. He was the last witness of the day. He finishes his testimony. The defense attorney cross-examination. The defense attorney finishes cross-examination. He reaches down, pulls out a basketball, and throws a chest pass at Magic Johnson on the witness stand and asks him to sign the ball. Flabbergasted. I just couldn't believe it happened. I mean, it's just, decorum and just everything. It's just not. It's a trial. I've never thought, I doing anything like that. A couple other things happened at trial with people celebrities of it. And I remember once I had one of the people who was a newspaper and a very nice person, and she had a production company later on, but they wanted FBI hats. I don't know. I was like, hey, I was like, 4 kids living in Westchester County, and all my taxes were crazy. I didn't have any money. FBI hats. Like, we don't have them in the office. Like, I got to go pay for them. And they were like $10-12 a piece. I'm not going to get you FBI hats. You want FBI? If you give me the money, I'll buy them. But I'm not giving you a hat. I'm not buying a hat. Yeah. But that's the way people, that's, something that happens. And I don't blame it. They just didn't, didn't see it as, they own a production company, they would have business, but they didn't realize that, agents or police officers would have to pay for that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Time and place.
Yeah, exactly.
Time and a place. Just as shiesty as somebody like Mr. Walker could be, sometimes restaurant owners. Now, I don't mean to give all restaurant owners a bad rap, but there are some, because listen, it is a cutthroat business. You're looking for ways to get ahead of your competition, especially if you're operating in New York City, which, certain restaurants have built up an iconic stature, or delis, or bodegas. Some, it's hard for them to last. It's hard for them to survive. And thus, desperate times call for desperate, albeit unfortunately for them, illegal measures. And in this instance, you had somebody cheating on their taxes. Why don't you take it from there?
I had a couple cases like that. The one I can think of that really outstanding to me was a guy, these Greek family. It was a pair of brothers that owned 32 Dunkin' Donuts and 4 Bennigan's. And what had happened is that they own these locations, and they literally did not pay any taxes. Like, they had hundreds, maybe thousands of employees. And think about 32 Dunkin' Donuts. How many employees do you have per location? In the Bennigan's, you probably had 1,000 employees. They had an office. They withheld employment taxes, but then they didn't pay anything to any of these people. And so the way this all got exposed was the way they were able to acquire all these locations was they got loans from a hard money lender, and the loans were secured by equipment. And so they would get a loan. Supposedly the loan was to fix up the location. Instead of fixing up the location, they just acquired another location. They kept acquiring locations, how they got so many locations. And so when these lenders come to collect their money, they go to try to seize the equipment and the location. Oh, no, we don't. My brother owns that now, or my other family member. They kept passing, and they kept passing around. And so the lawsuit, people try to lawsuit, and they end up being a federal lawsuit and all. it took about 3 years, and the magistrate who's handling this lawsuit finally got these brothers up on the stand, and it came out they hadn't paid any taxes and they had lied in some of their depositions. While he was upset about it, because they wasted the court's time, he made a referral to the U.S. Attorney's Office. U.S. Attorney's Office called in the IRS, who are the only people who can do taxes. The IRS does a raid. It makes the newspapers and so forth. I had done it at the guy who was assigned fantastic assistant U.S. attorney, guy named Perry Carbone. I did a trial with him and another great assistant who became a federal judge, woman named Kathy Sabel, two of the greatest attorneys I've ever met with, two great people I worked with. Well, Perry asked me to come help out because the IRS was having trouble figuring out the tax loss, and without the tax loss, these guys weren't indicted yet because they couldn't figure it out. So he asked me to take a look. Obviously, I don't do taxes, but what I do is there was allegation of some lying, of some perjury. So we got in. There was an intern who was an older person who was trying to learn the business. So he's interning in office, and we interview him. And the intern talks about, you remember the guy named Ira? The guy named Ira and getting a loan from some place called Central. And I know it's in Queens, but I don't know if it's a bank or what it is. So I go back, this is 2004, 2005. I guess it's 2005, I think I went to do it. Yeah, now I'm thinking about it. It was after I got back from Baghdad. Right before I went to Baghdad, I should say. I go back and get the white pages, and I look up Central. I go, Central Credit Union. I bet you got Queens white pages. So I waited till after 5 o'clock. I call, because all I knew was the name Ira. I call the credit union, and I get the dial by name. So I dial Ira, and I get Ira Rubin. So I called up the IRS agent who was in charge of the IRS case. I said, listen, let's go to Central Credit tomorrow morning. I got the guy's name, Ira Rubin. Let's see what happens. We go up there. It's on a Central Credit Union, works with medallion cabs. It's in a high-rise building in Queens. We go up there, go up the 10th floor. If then you go there, it looks like a regular bank, with glass and all that, partitions. Go in there and go, hey, look here to see Ira. And they go, wait here. And they go, something's weird. And the acting manager comes up to, I go, hey, FBI, I'm here to see Ira Rubin. He goes, Ira's a medical leave. I go, listen, what's going on? So he goes, but come with me. So we go in the back, and we're sitting outside. He has to stand outside a conference room, because outside the conference room, he goes in, closes the door. I hear him talking to it. He says, hey, I'm going to go in to talk to the treasurers in the back. So that's why he went in the back. So I hear him talking to the treasurer, and I hear him go, the FBI's here. He goes, where are they? He goes, they're outside the door. And I hear the treasurer go, and you let them in. And I turned to the IRS agent. I swear to the IRS says, we got something. So, they have to let us in. So we go in, I see the treasurer, and he's sitting there, literally stacks of loan files this high, 2 stacks of them. Turns out there's like 32 loans that IRA was responsible for. And these 32 loans were brought to the Central Credit Union by a loan broker who was in with the Greek community, all restaurants. And what had happened is they had basically taken the credit union for $16 million.
Jesus.
And the credit union only had $75 million worth of assets. What they did is they said, Ira was trying to show his uncle and show his mother, who he had taken over. He had just recently become CFO of the CEO of the credit union. The treasurer was his uncle, who ran another credit union, but he's the treasurer of this credit union. And so he was trying to show how he could grow the loan accounts, So he let this loan broker talk him into giving all these loans out. They know these loans were secured too. They got confession of judgments. And so the confession of judgments were, say the guy was supposed to own property at on a street address. It was number 3. They put number 5, or they put properties that were in the names of their people's spouses or other family members, so the compassionate judgments were useless. And I also talked to the loan brokers would let them talk into keeping a small reserve. So the first few payments, if they missed the payments, they could take it out of that. So I basically, it took about 6 or 7 months for the credit union to realize that $16 million went out the door. So eventually we got the the guys who ran the restaurant that ran the Bennigan's and then Dunkin' Donuts. We had them on the loan fraud, and we got them on loan fraud. They got $2 million. They got $2 million out of this deal, so they had to plead to the IRS. If you work at the IRS, they have to take a tax hit. So they took the tax hit, and we kind of figured out, the IRS was able to come up with a figure that they would accept. Both parties figured out. They would have taken the IRS 100 years to figure out what the tax loss was. So it was agreed upon. That's why they needed a plea. So we got another charge where they basically they got bank fraud. So they were screwing on the bank fraud, and the money they would spent years in jail. They still got a couple of years, but they would spend years in jail on that bank fraud. So that's why they collected the IRS charges.
That's incredible. I mean, it's amazing to see how far people will go. Like I said at the top, desperate times do call for sometimes, in some cases, illicit measures on behalf of people. And I'm not advocating for that, obviously. But and again, I say this often, but it does boggle the mind to see the talent people have, but how they use that talent so poorly and so unwisely. Imagine if they could, imagine if they utilize that skill and that ability for good, how far they could go in life. But instead, they're in a jail cell.
Oh, and in this case, the loan broker he fled to Greece, and we didn't get him. He ended up dying in Greece. He knew that Ira didn't know what he was doing, and so took advantage of Ira. And I got Ira because he lied on his he was trying to hide the fact that he gave up these bad loans. So he made, we got him on that, and turned out Ira was stealing from the credit union himself. Because I go to the credit union and say, hey, listen, let's pull Ira's accounts, because he had his accounts there. Lo and behold, what Ira was doing, there was a member who had a number of accounts. He owned a number of medallion cabs. So he had 10 or 12 different accounts. Ira's father was the accountant for the guy, and Ira knew that the guy never opened up his statements from the credit union, because his father, he'd come in, his father's office, Ira's father's office was in the credit union. So he knew this guy would come in with these statements not open. So Ira, what he started doing was stealing from the accounts. Sometimes he would transfer the money directly to his account, but other times he used a reserve soldier who was activated, was in Iraq. He transferred the money from the medallion cab owner's account into his friend's account, who was a reservist who was on active duty, and then the money then got into Ira's account. And he hit it that way. He stole about $200,000 from the credit union. And that wouldn't have been caught had it not been for this other stuff.
No, it's great work on your behalf. And you mentioned, of course, the suspect going to Greece, and then plays perfectly into what I wanted to ask you next, in that if there is a crime committed on U.S. soil, not just in the United States, but against United States property overseas, take, for example, the 1998 embassy bombing or the 2000 USS Cole bombing, the clock never runs out for the FBI, ever, until you get your man or your woman. And in this particular instance, you had a couple of international cases, but tell me about one of them.
I probably, case I'm probably proudest of in my career was a Jamaican lottery. It was what's commonly known as advanced fee scheme. It's advanced fee scheme known as the Jamaican lottery. And that started out in North Dakota with a elderly widow in Harvey, North Dakota, who ended up losing $300,000 as a result of people calling her, claiming that she had won a large amount of money and had to pay some fees and different deals. And she eventually hid, which a lot of people do. They hid it. She hid it from her family. Eventually, her children learn of it. They contact the local police department, which is Harvey, North Dakota, 3 officers. They They can't handle this. And no local police officer, no, and even the NYPD couldn't handle a case like this. It was just international in scope. So the Harvey police, the chief got a hold of the state securities department. They couldn't do anything about it, but they called me up. I had worked with them on another case, so they kind of trusted me and say, hey, can you do anything about it? I came over, took a look at it. I saw the money was going to somewhere in Florida, and we would get these complaints all the time. I said, you know what, this is something, I want to do something about this. It's real easy to know, oh, we can't do anything about it and let it go. But I think I can do something about this. So I looked at it. I said, it's in Florida. The money went to Florida. I looked at it. I think I can do something. So luckily for me, my regular supervisor was gone because he went on deployment somewhere. So the acting supervisor, who was a long-term acting supervisor, allowed me to open this case. One of my fellow agents in Bismarck, my supervisor sat in another location about 200 miles away from me, talked my supervisor into allowing me to open this case. Before I opened the case, I went up to the prosecutor, great AUSA named Claire Holcounter, who's now a federal magistrate judge. At the time, he was a criminal chief in North Dakota. I went to Claire. I told him I had worked a couple other cases with Claire, fraud cases. I said, Claire, I think I can do something on this case. Claire said, you know what, if you get it, I'll prosecute it. And Claire, he told me later on when we were successful in this case, said, I never thought you'd get the case. So I told you, yeah, why not? So anyway, I got the case. I got a number of subpoenas, worked out, identified this person, able to prove that person in Florida had knowledge that his money was stolen. That's always a big problem. How do you show that, even though we see money, just because we see money, you have to show that they have knowledge it's stolen money. Otherwise, they come up with an excuse and they don't know it's stolen. I was able, through the subpoenas and different techniques, able to prove that she knew this money was stolen. I had the records to prove it. I had it on paper. I went to Claire, wrote up a complaint. Claire took a little while, said, you know what, you got it. I'll let you send this, go to the magistrate. I went to the magistrate with an affidavit. We got an arrest warrant for this woman named Shannon O'Connor in Florida. In the meantime, there was a postal inspector in Florida named Scott Horn, great guy, who was working this in another angle, and it was other victims and so forth. He had sent a subpoena to, I believe it was Citibank. It just so happened, Citibank probably has 40 or 50 people who just do subpoenas. Well, anyway, they did the subpoena. She remembered she had the same subpoena for the same accounts that I had subpoenaed. So she put me in contact. She gave me, hey, some postal inspector in Florida asked for the same stuff. So she gave me the name. I contacted him, Scott Horn, and I say, Scott, this is what I got. I got an arrest warrant. This is what we got going. They say, no, you're a lot further than I am on this thing. And we would down in Florida, it would take forever to get the U.S. Attorney's Office to move. You mind with team up? Say, no, that's great. That's what you do in law enforcement. You team up. I mean, we're part of the same team. It doesn't matter your state, local, whatever federal agency. We're part of the team. You're on the team America. So we got together. We end up arresting Shannon O'Connor down in Florida. I went down there, and his FBI supervisor gave me a hard time in Florida. The local supervisor said, "How did you get this arrest warrant?" I said, and he's questioning me about my probable cause. I said, "Hey, sir, don't worry about it. It's already signed by the judge. You don't, I'm asking you to help. I'm going down to arrest the guy or arrest the subject. It's an arrest warrant. The probable cause has already happened. The case is being in North Dakota. It's done. I mean, I literally had to convince this guy. It was ridiculous. So anyway, I go down, eventually got other guys on the team. I actually met somebody I worked with in New York. From the FBI was great. And we went out with some postal myself and ended up arresting Shannon. And after 40 minutes of BS, and Scott Horn did a much better interrogator than I am. We eventually got her to, he said, hey, if I tell you who you're working for, will you tell us what's going on? She goes, okay, and then we go, I'll give the initials, LW, and she just puts her head down like that. And I said, right there, we knew we had, and then we were off to the races. They were calling that day. We ended up picking up $25,000 in cash in 2 different payments that were sent to her from victims. So we got the guy on tape, the main guy named Lavick Willocks, who was head of the conspiracy. We end up that case, I end up identifying almost 100 victims all around the country. Worked with a number of local law enforcement. Looked at. I think I testified probably 3 million emails. I looked at. I mean, I did. I'm going to say 75, 100 different email accounts, maybe more. Easily, probably 3 million emails, tying people together. End up the largest extradition ever from Jamaica. Extradited 14 individuals from Jamaica up to Charles, all out of North Dakota. Picked up another 3 individuals from Jamaica who came into the States. And I ended up picking up a number of people here in the States who were laundering the money. And I didn't want to do that, but that wasn't it. Obviously, it's a large criminal conspiracy in Jamaica. And these same operations happened in Costa Rica, happened in Israel, the same type of scam. And the tie-in between Costa Rica, Jamaica, and Israel is the people selling the names. These people, these lead list providers who are targeting these elderly individuals, they're predisposed to to fall for this scam. For a whole number of different reasons. I mean, unbelievably sad cases. I had one person eventually who committed suicide, but just unbelievably sad cases. And people lost, some people hundreds, even more. I mean, just millions and millions of dollars go out on this thing. So anyway, I was able to build a case where I arrested the lead list provider in Jamaica. I arrested the lead list provider, a guy named Ron. I forget Ron's last name, out of Fort Myers, Florida, who is a former Marine, by the way, which, obviously pisses me off being a Marine. I arrested a guy up in New York who was a kind of a really leader of this thing, as far as the lead list guy. He's worked in Rockland County. In my old squad, we did the search warrant. I worked in C-21 in White Plains. We actually did the search warrant and working with the people I had worked with, for a number of years. So we went up and did the arrest there, and then ended up arresting another guy a guy named Pavone out in Arizona, and the Prima up in Rochester, New York, and worked with the FBI up in Rochester, FBI out in Phoenix. Worked with state troopers up there, and I worked with so many different agencies around the country. So many agencies, they were so happy that somebody was doing something to these victims. These elderly, if everybody feels what happened, how bad. I'll give you an example. These people would try to cut, the law enforcement get involved, and they would try to cut off contact with their scammers. And people sometimes change their telephone numbers and so forth again. And the scammers would they would call the pizza delivery guy, or they would call taxis. And in some cases, you actually called local law enforcement to do a welfare checks on these people. They were so, bolden. They would actually get on the phone, claim to be the daughter or son of the victim, and have the local law enforcement do a welfare check, and then have the local law enforcement call them, and they would so they can get the new number of the victim, and then they would just go on and victimize them again. Wow. So I end up, the one case I got the U.S. Attorney General's Award for Fraud Prevention in 2019. I worked with great people, some great prosecutors in that case. Claire, I told you about, the guy named Jonathan O'Connor, James Thomas, another great AUSAs, all based out of here in North Dakota. Ended up working with the fraud section. We did a couple trials in that case. Great attorney named Tad Duree, who's still in the fraud section. Great fraud attorney. And Layla Bhavani, I can't pronounce her name. I'm gonna mess it up. But great. I mean, I worked with some tremendous people, prosecutors and agents. So most of the agents really were into it because everybody gets these complaints, and very rarely anything happened. The biggest problem was getting management, the FBI management, to go along with it. I mean, I constantly had, shut down this case. I was told at one time, shut down the case. I said, I got 14 people arrested, and at that time I had 14 people arrested, and we have a trial coming up. oh, pass it off to headquarters. I said, okay, fine. Tell me who in headquarters is going to take the case so I can tell the AUSA who's going to do the trial. And of course, they can't do that. And then, I had other people in management tell me, well, these people, these victims, they're just greedy because they have never talked to them. You never realized there's so many different reasons why these people fall for this. And I go on all night just talking about it. It's unbelievably sad, just awful what's happened, what we do. And it's literally billions of dollars these people that Americans and Canadians are losing to these scammers. And I think finally, a very small part of it is that I think the FBI and the Justice Department, and I think I had a very small part of it. I made a presentation to then Director Comey, who, I don't know, I'm sure he just threw it away, but there were some other people at headquarters who took it seriously in the white collar, I forget their names, and I don't want to throw them, I don't want to forget, they deserve the credit because they realized it and they came up and I think the FBI has changed it, helped change the priorities of the FBI, because at the time they were saying, well, it's not one of our bandwidths. They were talking about bandwidths. What are you talking bandwidths? Bad guys are bad guys. It just, we got out of catching bad guys under a couple of previous directives, and I'll just, it was more important to become an intel agency than it was actually put handcuffs on guys. And, with the FBI, and we got terrorism guys. There's great terrorism guys. Don't get me wrong. There's great national security, but we still, no one else going to do white collar crimes except us. It can do the resources than us. It's very hard for state agencies or local agencies to devote the time and effort and not have that national scope and the international scope that this has.
Exactly.
I'm sure I'm passionate about it, but it really, it's really to this day. People call me all the time. People call me. I obviously have a private investigating firm there, but I don't charge anybody. If victims call me, I don't charge them any money. I try to help them. If I can, I try to talk to them, give them advice. I would never charge anybody anything for that kind of. That it just. They've already been victimized once. They don't need to be victimized twice.
No, and I don't mind the passion because it's true. And you're seeing it now starting to affect even different generations to where, for example, I've been getting inundated with these spam emails claiming to be Costco, claiming to be ADT, and I keep blocking them, and the email addresses aren't even listed to me. They're listed to a Rosanna, to a Colton. And it's scary how they get your information. You don't put it out there. Somehow they find it. They want to get you, and you can keep blocking them and reporting them as spam. They'll find new different addresses, new different pseudo means to access you, so they don't stop. And with the boom of technology continuing well into the 21st century, what's scarier is they have even more tools to operate with.
No, it's true. And the do not call list, people thought, but these people are criminals. They don't care about the criminal. And
exactly.
I say I did a lot of search. I'll just say one other thing about it. The FTC try to do the right thing, and they have a do's and don'ts of telemarketing. There's obviously a problem with telemarketing. The problem is all the scammers, by putting out the don'ts, they know that's exactly what they do. You've just given them a roadmap on how to scam people by doing the don'ts. Legitimate. So, people trying with very good intentions, and it doesn't work out.
Right. No, unfortunately, it doesn't. A quick aside before I continue with your career. 9/11 was a difficult day. And before I even get into 9/11, actually, hello to Angie Ang. Good to see you, Angie. And say hello to Joe Morey for me. Harbor Charlie, Ruth Ann Griffin, whose dad was an emergency service cop with the Spider Griffin in Truck 7 in Brooklyn. Good to see you, Ruth Ann. And Commissioner Steve Zaslawski. And just a quick aside, I know you answered this earlier, but he got here a little bit later, so he asked this. Did you ever work with Mayor Giuliani? I don't think so, because by the time that you got to the DA's office, he was already, was he still in the attorney's office in 91?
Giuliani was a mayor, later became the mayor. And my only interaction with Giuliani was, probably the PD won't like this, I got burglarized 3 times in Manhattan in late 94, early 95. It's in a 6-month period, I got burglarized 3 times. My wife was pregnant at the time. So finally, the last one was New Year's Eve. I was in the FBI Academy at the time. I wrote a handwritten note to Giuliani because I didn't, I was actually away at the academy when the second burglary happened. And at the time, the police department were trying to recover from it, and I don't want to send anybody down the river, but the burglary, nobody came to dust, no one did any, there was no investigation, and I think we had lost. And I was in the years off. Don't get me wrong. I think we had lost the ability of actually going back to police work, because we were just putting band-aids and things. The crime was so bad. So as Giuliani and Bratton and Kelly beforehand, they started reducing crime. We had to learn how to start investigating again. And so I wrote a letter, and a letter to Giuliani. And the only thing I had is that literally like a week later, the local precinct came up, had people dust for prints, and they actually did, and they did some stuff. I mean, obviously, probably more public relations than anything else, but it was, at least it was
something.
They do something. So obviously, whatever happened, I'm sure someone in the mayor's office. But my only interaction with Mr. Giuliani.
As I always like to say to the audience, even if I don't get to the question right away, eventually I do get to it. And then Commissioner Soslavsky, I was glad I was able to get to it for you. So like I said, with that day, the FBI did lose a man, Lenny Hatton, who was a volunteer fireman. He was coming into work. He saw what was going on. He went down to the scene. He was helping the fire department, I believe, in the South Tower when it came down, as we were talking about off the air. And you guys have heard me mention him a lot for my emergency service unit miniseries. You and Mike Curtin were Marines together. He was killed. He was among the 23 New York City police officers to die in the line of duty that day. So in addition to watching this horror happening in your home city, you knew those two guys, and I imagine many more who perished that day as well. Where were you that day when you heard? When did you get down there?
I was in Manhattan the morning it happened. I was working a surveillance squad at the time. I was kind of being punished, and I was working a civilian squad. And my family was living in London. I was back in New York, going back and forth. So I was working an afternoon or evening shift. There was another surveillance team that was doubling up on somebody who was working. So I came in Manhattan early, go running, then go swimming, and then go hang out, and then go to my shift. So I'm in Manhattan. I hear about their outrunning. I hear about their first plane, and I thought it was a puppet plane, a little, Cessna that went in, because I didn't, they just said a plane hit the tower. It was a beautiful, bright day. So how could anybody hit that tower? I couldn't believe it. So anyway, went in, swam, got out of the pool, and they said a second plane hit the other tower. It's, oh my God. So then I realized, hey, got dressed real fast, tried to call the office. Obviously the telephones weren't working, realized what was going on. So I got to my car, got in my view car because I was, going to go to work. Got on the radio, and they said, hey, people 26 Federal Plaza, report to a staging area in Chinatown by the park. They said nobody else go to the trade center. Everybody stay out of the trade center. I contacted the other surveillance team. I said, hey, listen, obviously I drove to them. They said, hey, everybody go to the Javits Center. Because the idea at that time, there was a plane missing, and the thought was it might go into the Empire State Building. But people didn't, people didn't know. So we staged outside the Javits Center, and we stayed there that morning. And just awful day. And just remember, we were right by. There was I think it's 35th Street. There's 36th Street. One of those streets. There's in the middle of the block. There's a fire station. And I just remember going there and seeing the boots, the shoes. I'm saying the boots, but the shoes lined up where the fire trucks. Next to where the fire trucks would have been. Obviously, the fire trucks are gone. Out trying to save people down at the Trade Center, and I seen those trucks, and it hits you really. It hit me bad. At the time, I was living in Pelham Manor, which is right over the Bronx line. It was a very small village, and I saw the Pelham Manor Fire Department, which is a half volunteer, half paid department, truck going down to the World Trade Center, and I said to myself, "Oh my God, there must be unbelievable losses on the fire department if the Pelham Manor." They need the Pelham Manor Fire Department to go down to the Trade Center. It's not good.
Yeah.
Just awful day. And Lenny Hatton, just to point out, he's also a former Marine.
He was a bomb tech too.
yeah, I knew Lenny. He was on C-19 when I knew him, which was the joint bank robbery task force. He was a great agent, say in Marine, and obviously Mike Curtin, who I knew from my time in Fox Company. He was the company gunny, tremendous Marine. We went to the Gulf War together. He was in a different company than I was doing the Gulf War, but he was my company gunny when I was the XO of Fox Company, 2nd Battalion, 25th Marines in New Rochelle, New York.
Just a couple, both great guys, as you said. Just a couple more questions, because the hour and a half has really flown by with us. It's been a great conversation with you. So many different facets to your career. Like I said, your work in cases primarily revolving around fraud, where you're constantly dealing with the dregs of society, people who deal specifically in deceit. And I talked earlier about mental fog. It's easy to take it personal, and the job by nature can just eat people up sometimes. And some people are able to take that step back and kind of decompress and take a deep breath and continue to move forward. Other people have a hard time of it. I'm sure you saw that throughout your career. What helped you to not get so enveloped in it to where it consumed you and it changed you for the worse?
Yeah, I guess people. I don't like people getting away with things. I don't know. No matter what, I just don't like people getting away with things. And the one thing being out, this case I did in North, the number of fraud cases in North Dakota, they was always brought you back a little bit. I hate to say it, but we also did a lot. I also did a lot of Indian country cases at the same time, and those are mostly violent crimes, a lot of sexual abuse, just absolutely awful things that people do. Just awful. So in some ways, the fraud was almost like a diversion from going down and seeing another dead kid that you have to do. I had a 4-year-old be 70% of the body burnt, 2nd or 3rd degree burns, things like that. It was just awful type things. So that is almost like the other case. And honestly, like the Jamaican lottery case, I took this stuff home. I had 4 kids. My wife did a lot of traveling. I'd wait till the kids go to bed and I'd start looking at emails in that case, just to because I felt so strongly that if I didn't do it, nobody was going to do it. And I had prosecuted. I felt like these people were relying on me, and I told everybody, if I get any money back to me, pennies on the dollar. But I told them I was going to, I told this Schmitz I was going to get everybody from that person. I got everybody who called her, everybody who sold her name, so everybody who laundered her money, and all these other. I got them all, and I said I was going to do it, and I did. I mean, with help of a tremendous amount of other people around the country. But I don't want to toot my horn a little bit, but I think most people would say I was driving force behind that.
No, and it's a lot to be proud of, for sure. You have everything to be proud of with that. You're doing a good thing. You need for as many people that are out there tenacious about committing crime, you have to have people that are tenacious enough, or equally tenacious, if not more so, to stop it in return. And Angie Yang brings up a good question: do the victims eventually get their money back? If not all the money, I'll add at least some of it, if not most of it.
All pennies on the dollar, whatever I can make. And I constantly looking for money. Remember, most of his money. First of all, these idiots, like in the Jamaican lottery case, these guys have so much money, and they actually will have big parties together. And they'll have DJs out there. And I arrested one of the DJs. Actually, who was laundering the money. But these guys will, the next song, how much money they burn, if they actually will light the money, and we'll talk $100 bills. They will light them on fire, hundreds of, $200, $300, $400, light them on fire to get the next. They try to show off to get the next song played, their song when they play. So money's just waste. These guys waste the money. Whatever I can, and I did recover some along the way. We try to get back to the people, and then, I'll just leave it at that. Sometimes we'll just say that the Justice Department, sometimes the forfeiture people, a better job could be done there than it's done. We'll just say that. But the prosecutors I worked with were great. Don't get me wrong. I worked with some great prosecutors, but there was sometimes, and some of it was just regulations or whatever, but we could do a better job.
I think so. There's always room for improvement in everything. That's not a knock. It's a fact in
No,
any
no,
industry.
I'm,
There's
I'm not
always
trying to throw anybody under the bus, please.
no, of course, and I know, and it's true though. Local law enforcement, federal law enforcement, even if you're doing something well, there's always different plateaus that you can hit and different things that you can try to do. Before I get to the rapid fire, I should have asked this earlier, but it's not too late. Like I said, it's kind of funny. Instead of going from North Dakota to New York City, you're going from New York City to North Dakota. What prompted that switch?
I have to credit my wife, Sabina, who's one of the smartest people I've ever met. Who's very, she's wanted to give our kids something exposure, and my wife, she's much more successful than I am financially. I mean, but we was living in Pelham, New York. We were living in the smallest house in the town, and we were paying like $18,000 in taxes. We had friends about who were paying $60,000 in taxes. I mean, obviously, I couldn't pay $60,000, but it was just like, hey, we'll give our kids a different outside of the East Coast and the West Coast. And at the time, I had 14 years in the FBI. I could go because 14 in New York, they have called a kicker, so they have a thing called officer preference, where you can be transferred after so many years. It's all based on seniority. Because of my 14 years plus my 5 years kicker, 19 years, retire agent at 20, you figure the math, I can basically almost go anywhere in the country. And my wife said, you know what? I was out, she was looking at real estate, said, Grand Forks, it's a nice college community. It looks like a good place, kind of different, give the kids a different perspective. And so I put put that down. And then my wife was working for Pfizer Animal Health at the time, and she came out here for a rep ride. She came to Bismarck. She said, Bismarck's a pretty nice town, small, but it's pretty nice. So why don't you put that down? So I did. I put it down, and lo and behold, like 9 months later, because it turns out nobody wants to go to either one of these offices. They're hard to fill. So I get the call. Boom. I'm in Bismarck, North Dakota. Do I want to go to Bismarck? At the time, I had put in for a supervisor's job down in headquarters. I was given that job, so I had to choose between a job at headquarters or a job in Bismarck, North Dakota. And looking at it, weighing it, and talking to my wife, and said, give the kids a different perspective, and it turned out to be great. My kids, I'm proud of my kids. 3 of my 4 kids were going to Naval Academy. My 4th kids are going to college in Aberdeen, Scotland. So it was great for the kids. I don't think that would have happened if I had stayed in New York. And so in that way, that's why we came out. I came out to Bismarck.
And the last question before the rapid fire is 2021. You called it a day. You'd had a great run from the DA's office through the bureau, 26 years, a lot of different moments. When did you know it was time to go?
I to this day, I don't consider myself retired.
That's true.
I consider myself
still active.
I aged out. I got 3 years. The bureau has a 57 mandatory retirement. I was able to extend for 3 years. At 60, you got to go the day before your 60th birthday. So the day I retired, it was on a Sunday. I left the office at 11 o'clock that night. So help me God, this is true. I left the office, handed in my gun, handed everything in, left at 11 o'clock. And I always say, basically, I got fired. I consider myself being fired with a lifetime severance. I love the job. I tell people, I felt like for 26 years, almost 26 years, I didn't have a job. And which to this day, I don't consider the FBI a job. It was just, it was the greatest thing I ever did. I worked with some great people.
And I imagine that having your firm Gasper Investigations, of course, which I should be, I would be remiss not to mention, is a good outlet for you to stay active. Because let's face it, some guys and gals retire, and it's kind of like, okay, well, now what do I do? You don't have that problem.
No, exactly. I'm trying to build a business. I try to do things. If they, I hate to say this, if they said, hey, you can go back and keep your retirement and just go back, and I don't have to make arrests. I can just go out and back to the bureau and do fraud cases and get fraud. I have so much money, PPP and other things. I literally probably go back and do it because I feel so strongly about it. But anyway, that's, I Gasper Investigations. I work, different sides. I've done some defense work, started civil work. I'm working for one of the tribes, which it was almost like I'm back in the FBI because I'm doing some work, which is nice. I feel like I'm doing some real good work.
As you should. It's a good feeling to have. And as Angie Yang points out, and she would know from her 20 years in the NYPD, oath don't expire.
Yeah.
You're still under that oath, no matter what you do, no matter where you go in retirement. So this has been a lot of fun. It's time for the rapid fire. 5 hit and run questions from me, 5 hit and run answers from you. You can say pass if you want. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. First, between the Marine Corps, between the DA's office and the FBI, funniest colleagues you ever worked with?
The number one funniest guy ever, a guy named Ryan O'Neill, still an active duty FBI agent. Not only the funniest guy I ever worked with, the best agent, bar none, I ever worked with. That guy can work any violation. It doesn't matter. That guy can do it. He makes the reason why he's funny because he makes life's observations, and he's a great interviewer, but just very smart guy. But he plays the dumb guy. He plays like he's not very smart. And that's what makes a very good interrogator. Somebody who has no ego, and Ryan O'Neill has no ego. Absolutely, bar none, the best investigator I ever worked with.
Second, 26 Federal Plaza is such a unique place, not just for what the building contains, but once you get out, it's an interesting neighborhood just to be in. What was your favorite thing about working in that vicinity?
I'm a runner. And what I loved about, part of the FBI, they give you 3 hours a week to work out. And I loved running up the east side, up the west side, over the bridges into Brooklyn. That's what I loved about working in Lower Manhattan.
Third, best advice anyone ever gave you?
Dave Daly, my high school track coach. It might be kind of strange, but he talked about he's walking down the street and he's in his 20s and he sees a 12-year-old kid in the street throwing a football. Dave didn't really know how to throw a football, and the kid taught him how to throw a football. Now think about it. He's 20-something years old and he's got a 12-year-old showing him how to football, and he said, "Hey, don't be, if somebody knows something more than you do, take their advice." And there's an old saying where you don't have to be the smartest man in the room, but or smartest person in the room, but if you're willing to take advice from other people, you can be the wisest person in the room.
That's good advice. It's not strange at all. It's perfect. I love it. Fourth, when you worked in New York City and when you go to visit, favorite bar or restaurant in the city?
I think of two. And then neither one of them one is Lassiter Herrings, which is a deli in Brooklyn, in Brooklyn Heights. I believe it's on Montague Street.
Mm-hmm.
Cranberry Park sandwich. Every time I'm back to New York, I make sure I go to Lassiter Herrings. And I've been lucky, when I was agent, I would come back for different things, and I always make sure I went to there. And the second one, a place called Four Corners, a pizzeria in Pelham Manor, New York. It's right off the Bronx line, just a little north of the Bronx line. Sometimes you'll see the guys from the local precinct because the last street in Pelham Manor is in New York City. People don't realize it. It's called Politician Row, and a lot of politicians in the Bronx live up there. And so you'll see a SWAT car, patrol car will have to go patrol that area, and they'll end up going to Four Corners and getting pizza because everybody knows it's the best pizza. That's all they sell, pizza, nothing else. You got to pay cash. It's pizza. You get Sicilian pizza, regular. You can get stuff on it, but that's it. There's nothing else.
There you go. And the fifth and final question of the rapid fire. If you can grab a new agent fresh out of the academy, given your experiences in the Bureau, what advice would you give them?
I guess a couple things. One is, this is the greatest job ever. It's not a job. It's the greatest job ever. And if you think it's a job, go find something else to do. It's a calling. It's not a job. If you're here to make money, go find another job. The second thing I would say, it's funny, you're working in the country, sometimes you see people in very bad circumstances. Sometimes the work circumstances, and police officer ended up, you're victims in the worst moment of their lives sometimes, or you have perpetrators who have committed horrible things. And every time I walked in, I was in any country I walked into, and I saw a homeless dead person or something, I said, at some point that was somebody's little boy or little girl. And always remember that no matter who the person is, that's somebody's little boy or little girl. Please treat them that way. And I've met people who have done horrific things, but not most of the people who commit crimes. And sometimes they've done horrific things, and not if you put them in a different circumstance, they wouldn't be a bad person. 30, that's 70%. 30%, I don't care what you do. You got to figure it out, and lock away the key. They're just going to keep going. But 30% of the people in a different circumstance, they wouldn't be. And the same thing, even the homeless person in the street. And I'm not advocating, hey, just go out and give people money and stuff like that, but realize that was somebody's little boy or little girl, and how the circumstances they ended up in that street, or they on that slab or something. Always remember that. Make sure you do justice to those people.
Humanity is key in everything, but especially in a profession like that one. This has been great. Stick around. We'll say goodbye off the air. I want to thank you for coming on and doing this. Besides Gasper Investigations, of which I include the link in the description, that is, of course, your private investigations firm. Before I say goodbye to the audience, is there a shout out you want to give to anyone or anything?
Listen, I've worked with some great agents, a guy in New York named Carl Couture, Jeff Select, a guy named Steve Chapman, who was in C24, Andre Cistro is still there, a guy named Chip Curtin, just a great guy. I'm in Bismarck with a guy named Mike Holt, another great, and obviously Ryan O'Neill, who's greatest agent I've ever worked with.
Shout out to all of them, and shout out to everybody in the audience tonight that tuned in. I appreciate you guys always being here and supporting the show. Coming up next on the Mike to New Haven podcast, tomorrow night you'll get a show, of course, another volume 26 of the E-Men inside the NYPD's Emergency Service Unit. He was originally in the New York City Housing Police's Emergency Rescue Unit when they formed it in late 1993. When the merge happened, he went over to 4-Truck in the Bronx. Actually, no, 2-Truck, then worked in 4-Truck, then worked in 8-Truck across Harlem and the Bronx and Brooklyn, respectively. And that is Mr. Jerry Kozlowskis, who joined me for that. And then Friday, dispatcher in the FDNY, volunteer in upstate New York, Lake Carmel to be specific. That'll be Jim Raftery for what will be volume 32 of the best, the bravest interviews with the FDNY's elite. In the meantime, on behalf of retired FBI Special Agent Frank Gasper, I am Mike Colón. Have a great rest of your night. We will see you next time. Take care, everyone.